This
I'm
is
just,
for round eight boxing. Delighted, joined with Paulie Malignaggi. Paulie, how are you, mate?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Thanks for joining me. We're going to talk a little bit about the Canelo Crawford fight coming up. On paper, it should be the fight of the year. What are your thoughts on this fight?
On paper, it's the most talked about fight of the year. I think. I mean, I don't know what. You're telling me it's on paper it's a fight of the year. Why do you think the fight is a fight of the year? Just because of the popularity, or do you think stylistically? I think stylistically the fight's horrible. I don't think the fight's going to be good at all. But it's two big names. I think the public have become accustomed to just matching big names that create star power. We used to match styles in boxing. We used to try to put together, fighters that, we thought would make good fights. Now we just, if one guy's popular, another guy's popular, say, okay, let's just make them fight. Sometimes it doesn't even matter the weight class. So I'm not really crazy about the fight, to tell you the truth. But yeah, it's a lot of fanfare. Crawford is, I think, starting to gain a little bit of favoritism. When at first it seemed like he would be too small, and yeah, there's a lot to talk about.
I mean, it is probably going to play out to be a fairly boring fight to watch, a bit of a chess match potentially, maybe not a favourite fight, but it is two of the biggest stars in the sport coming together. You mentioned there about the size. Canelo's obviously coming up a couple of weights. How much difference will that make in this fight, do you feel?
Um, I feel like it's the only thing that makes the fight competitive. I feel like if Canelo wasn't so much bigger than Crawford, this wouldn't even be a competitive fight. You know, I think that's the only thing Canelo has that may sway the competitiveness of the fight. Maybe even win him the fight. Who knows? I mean, if there's a danger for Crawford, it's the fact that he's smaller. But I don't think he. Other than that, you have much to work with as far as Canelo being able to match up with Crawford in any way. But that one factor of natural size is a big factor. It could actually be the main difference because weight classes exist for a reason.
It's quite interesting. You made a point there where actually being a smaller man may play into Crawford's favour. Just talk to me about the positives and the pros of being a smaller man in a fight.
Um, I mean, listen, at first glance, to be the smaller man is never a good thing. But there's situations where you can be a little bit quicker, maneuver a little bit better, and you know, um, sort of be the sharper boxer. The negative thing is you got to work harder because clinching and holding to rest is not an option anymore because the bigger man in the clinches can prevent you from resting, can make it physical. It's a lot harder to hurt a bigger guy, and a bigger guy will hurt you more than what you're used to being hit with. So there's a lot more negatives than positives. That's why it's always special when a guy goes up in weight classes and accomplishes things. In this particular fight, though, I think Crawford is better than Canelo in every way, except the fact that there's a natural size difference for Canelo.
For this fight, why do you feel Crawford has gone up a couple of weight divisions to fight Canelo? Is it just purely financial? Is it legacy? If it does play out to be a pretty boring fight, does that almost paint the fight in the aftermath?
Yeah, I mean, if it turns out to be a boring fight, it'll be the typical boxing egg on your face type of situation, which is getting to be pretty normal nowadays. Um, I think it's mainly financial. Legacy wise, it turns into legacy wise because Canelo's been allowed to sort of create a bigger legacy than I think he really should have. I mean, he's been able to avoid his mandatory contenders like Benavidez for years and never had could always pick and choose his opponents. So you create a legacy in that way, but so is it a fake legacy? I don't know. I mean, it's a pretty good legacy, but you know, was there ever a time where we saw Canelo taking on his toughest opponent at the moment? He always took on pretty good opponents, but can you name a time where when there was the toughest of those in and around his weight class, and Canelo decided, I'm going to go for the toughest guy? Is there a time at any point in his career where he went for the toughest guy in that moment?
The one that springs to mind would be Golovkin, but he avoided him for a couple of years. The Golovkin's team tried to get him earlier and sooner, and even that is, controversial, that first decision against Golovkin.
Um,
Uh,
Golovkin at 35 was his most difficult, his most dangerous guy at that moment. I don't know. I thought Golovkin at 33, 32 would have been more dangerous, no? But he didn't want to do it that then. So, I mean, it's kind of, okay, it's going to be legacy with Crawford, obviously. But my question is, what? It's mainly financial. It's gonna be sold as legacy. The way you sell a product, but it's really financial.
Do you think having that much star power like Canelo does almost ruins his potential almost because he, like you say, he isn't stepping up. He's almost cherry picking at times when and who he fights.
I think I think it's money makes the world go round. I think the networks let guys like that do whatever they want because it generates money for everybody, not just for the fighter. So everybody wants to everybody wants to let it happen. And all of a sudden doing the right thing does it no longer becomes priority. So it is what it is. It's become what it's become. He's not the first guy. I think we've seen that more and more in these years.
I,
Oh,
I agree. You mentioned obviously Crawford. You feel he's better than Canelo in every aspect. What makes Crawford so good?
IQ, ring IQ. Crawford is a very good decision maker in the ring. He's got a lot of ability, obviously, but his ability to think in there is on par with the Mayweathers of the world. He's a very very high fight IQ, and his decision making is and versatility in there is what makes him really good.
You mentioned about Canelo's opposition and his CV. There's been a lot of talk recently about Crawford's resume, and they feel that he's not fought anybody who is elite or world class. What do you make of that?
I think Crawford took on the guys he was able to take on. Um, sorry, mate. Sorry, mate. I think Crawford was able to take on the guys he was able to take on, depending on his promotional ability. A guy like Canelo is so big, he can do whatever he wants. With Crawford, he's it's not that way. You got to be in the right circumstances. You got to be signed to the right people, and so on and so forth. So for a lot of years, yeah, we saw a lot of the big welterweights were at PBC, and he was not there. But the boogeyman of that PBC team was Errol Spence, right? And so what we saw by Crawford doing what he did to Errol Spence at the time he did, I think that made a big statement because that was the guy that was beating all those guys that apparently Crawford was not able to fight.
Absolutely. In terms of the fight, you mentioned obviously it could go either way. It could Canelo's favour because of his size, Crawford's favour because of his ring IQ. Who do you think will win the fight?
When I first heard the fight, I said, Canelo's too big. He's going to be too strong. But the way Canelo looked against Skull was really, really, but this is such a turn off. I actually started to think Crawford now has a chance, and I think it's a more even fight on paper than I thought originally.
Is the skull fight something that you could potentially look into a bit too much? Is it one of those fights where they say fighters don't get up for these bigger or the smaller fights than they do for this one? Will we see a better Canelo against Crawford, or I suppose we have to?
Um, Fighters don't get up for these kind of small fights. Well, that's not an excuse for Canelo. Canelo can fight whoever he wants. And it's not. Sometimes fighters don't get up for the small fights, but that's all they have the choice to do, right? But Canelo's not one of those guys. Canelo can fight whoever he wants. So if Canelo's not getting up for fights like that, why is he fighting them in the first place? To steal everybody's money? So that's not an excuse for Canelo. It can be an excuse for some other guys. That's not an excuse for Canelo. Canelo chose to fight Skull. You know, um, so I'm not sure. I just saw a very disinterested guy. And it really didn't help in promoting what was on the back end of that, which is the Crawford fight.